Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us for the second edition of Table Talk, which is a series of conversations about and adjacent to food. It's a series in which we chat with a variety of people, from people with a variety of expertises. And today is an old friend, Antoine Lewis, who is a food writer, has been a restaurant critic, has run a website which is all about food and things like that, and also is a chef. His blog is called The Curly Head Chef, and he runs a series of conversations also on Instagram, and you find him at his name at Anton Lewis on Instagram. You should check out those conversations as well. But here we are for a general chat, and what we're going to be talking about today is this whole thing about authenticity. What is authentic cuisine? And while we talk about that, a related topic, which is about recipes and following recipes to the T, so to speak, in which is a kind of an authenticity. And Anton is a believer in not being tied to recipe. So, Anton, in the first place, thank you for coming in, and also thank you for filling in at short notice. You were supposed to appear a little bit later, and we had to reschedule because in these times of illnesses and all that, people were not able to make it. So, thank you for stepping in. And
Pleasure, Peter. Just one small correction that I will make. It's the curly head cook and not chef. It's the curly head cook, not chef. Given all the big arguments that are happening about home chefs and home cooks, I kind of steer on the side of being a cook and not a chef.
so, like, what is a cook and what is a chef then?
Well, a chef really is a managerial title, actually. And in France, it's what you call your boss. So it's a fairly generic term actually for boss, and it's not exclusive to the kitchen. So in the army, I think you'll have a chef de sergeant. It's a quasi-military term that is used for anyone who heads a team. And I think so your chief secretary in a company is called the chef secretary, chef the secretary, or something of that sort. So it generically means boss in France, but it has now come to mean someone who is an expert cook. Though actually, if you go to a hotel kitchen, the chefs really are the guys who are at the pass and who are checking the quality of the food, and it's the line cooks who actually do the cooking.
You see the expression chef perhaps in English usage in, say, chef de mission. In
Chef the mission, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So yeah, yes, that makes
yeah.
sense. I hadn't actually thought of that till you said it just now. So, are you familiar with the way a restaurant or in a hotel kitchen runs, the various kinds of chefs and all that?
Well, I did hotel management. I did my industrial training in a hotel. So I mean, I don't remember all the names of the departments as such, but yeah, I mean, right now it's broadly divided by region and by hot kitchen and cold kitchen, and then you have the butchery. So your cold kitchen will do all your desserts, your salads, and all of that. Butchery is common to all of the kitchens in the hotel, and you indent the day before or 2 days before to say what are the supplies you need, and the butchery will carve up everything for you. And then if it's a specialty kitchen, of course, then that's a particular kind of kitchen. It'll be the Chinese or Indian, but also for banqueting, you have something which is called the main kitchen, which is subdivided into different cuisines. So you have the Western kitchen, the Indian kitchen, the Oriental kitchen, and all of these contribute to your banquets because the banquets have various kinds of dishes going out at the same time. They're not cuisine specific.
Okay, all right. So you did your entire your catering college, so to speak, if you use the common term for it. Did you ever work in the business?
I did my training and then I ran a Chinese home delivery service for about a year before I became a journalist.
So why did you decide to stop doing the Chinese home delivery?
I have no business sense.
Fair enough.
So I was really passionate. And this is one of the big myths about cooking and, about love for cooking translating into running a restaurant and all that. You don't cook at all when you're running a restaurant or chef. It's all about all the administrative stuff. It's about procuring, all your ingredients, being in touch with customers. It's everything but cooking for them.
All right. So, so then, okay, the journalism bit. So then, what did you do? What did you do in journalism first? Did you start writing about food, or were you doing other stuff and then graduated to or moved towards writing about food?
No, I got straight into food, and I when I started, it was 98 or 99. There were hardly any food writers on the scene at that point. So I wasn't even planning to become a journalist. Actually, I had written for Femina a couple of times before, and I said, well, since this is something I obviously have a skill for, and people aren't like throwing my articles back at me, let me just explore that. And I don't know if you remember this publication called Sunday Observer. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah. So, I mean, I'd written for a couple of, I was just going around. I was just literally cold calling with editors and feature editors. I just go up to like Indian Express, Times, or whatever it is and say, like, you want articles on food? This is my background.
Hmm.
And I went to Sunday Observer. There was someone there they had a cuisine editor. They had a cuisine page. And I asked her about it, and she said, "Yeah, sure. What do you want to write on?" I gave her, pitched a story idea. So okay, sounds good and all that, but before I commit to you, I want you to meet my editor. And I said, "Okay, fine, unusual, but okay." So I went back a couple of days later. I met, introduced me to the editor, and said, "Listen, I'm going to be quitting in about a week's time. I think this guy is good enough to take over from me." And that's it. That's how I became a journalist.
All right. So tell us about that. So what being a food writer really, and within writing food, there is of course all kinds of stuff. You can write recipes, and you can write for to help cooks, so to speak, and you can write around food. You write the stories of food, and
Right.
uh, there is of course the reviewing part of it. Eating food on behalf of other people, so to speak. You've
Hmm.
done all of these, right? So
Yeah.
can you tell us a little bit about the different ways of writing about food, sort of simplified a little for people who are not writers and journalists?
Okay. So, I mean, I started out as a restaurant critic because I had a background in the industry and I uh, had run a place. So I knew what it meant like for a restaurant or what the challenges they faced and what they were capable of and what they were not. But once I started reviewing, I realized that I was really unfamiliar with a lot of food that was out there in restaurants and that I needed to brush up my knowledge. And I started reading up on a lot of things, started reading about food history, trying to understand where dishes were coming from, how they were actually made. When food festivals are happening at places, I get the menu beforehand. So I kind of look up each of the dishes, trying to understand what its history was, how to contextualize it. And from that, I know as you keep reading, you kind of see parallels from one place to the other. You see things evolving in a certain way in one place, and you see connections between all of them. And you suddenly start to realize that it's a much bigger story. The food that comes onto your plate, that comes onto the table, is really the final chapter in a very long story and in a very long history that is very, very fascinating. And then suddenly you kind of get into uh, learning about the people behind it, learning about why certain dishes are made in a certain way, the politics behind it, the economics behind all of these things. And you kind of just start getting sucked into all of that, and your interest starts broadening. And I have to say, I mean, in this, the fact that I did literature and that, in the same way that writing is also part of culture, it's part of the material culture of people. You see the same kind of thing happening. So you see what is happening in terms of, whether there are wars happening, there are, social changes that are happening. You see the same kind of translation into writing as well. So for me, that kind of understanding that process of making those connections became so much more easier, and I was able to contextualize where food fits into the human experience. And then at some point, I found that, okay, if I want to understand people, if I want to understand culture, if I want to understand how things work, food is a good way for me to do that.
I started out as well. I tried a little bit of this and that, and I did a few food reviews for a magazine that I worked with, and then went off and did advertising. And when I went back into journalism many years later,
Hmm.
trying to figure out what I wanted to do, and this was one of the things about food, and I found myself in a little bit of a trap, I guess, having read too many food reviews by then.
Hmm.
I I wasn't able to find my own voice. I did only a very few. I did a few for Naresh at Time Out, where I
Huh.
it was the occasional, once a month or so, Baba, go see this restaurant there in New Bombay, because Naresh would only give me the stuff in New Bombay, and
Right.
there weren't that many restaurants opening then. But
Yeah.
the kind of deep context that you're talking about and the comparative kind of thing, because I hadn't been eating as a critic, so to speak. I was eating,
Hmm.
I was just going to restaurants and eating and not really thinking about the food. And suddenly having
Right.
to think about it was very, very different. I mean, first I was like, yeah, food reviews, fun free meal every now and then. And then realized that, damn it, it's actually far more than that occasional free meal that you get, right? It's that
Yeah. Yeah.
deep understanding of food that you need. So would you say then that, or rather, what would you say, to put it as a question, what would you say is necessary for someone to be a good food reviewer?
Okay. So first of all, Naresh wouldn't allow me to review for Time Out because he says if you review, you will not like any restaurant. So, I'm a tough critic. I think everybody knows that the industry is scared of you. But and there was a piece yesterday in Man's World about the death of the film critic. I don't know if you see that, and it's a conversation I wrote a few years ago, I think, for one of these magazines about the death of the restaurant critic. And one of the things that I've realized that uh, as a critic you learn to do, and it takes a really a lot of time, is to be able to contextualize the restaurant in its geography. Because each restaurant and all foods itself are very, very different. It's not that one recipe prepared in one place can automatically be taken and transplanted to another place, and you're going to have the same results, and people are going to respond to it in exactly the same way. And the classic examples are something like McDonald's. It can't bring its beef burger to India for one thing, but it's also got to change the way that it makes its burgers in India. You look at Kit Kat, for instance. The Indian Kit Kat is a lot more milk chocolate than it is anywhere else in the world. I mean, you won't get a bitter chocolate version over here. So food doesn't always kind of move very easily. Restaurants again are very, very location specific. So even within Bombay, a restaurant that is opened in Bangalore and opens a branch in, say, New Bombay or South Bombay, the same dishes aren't going to work in both places. People are going to respond differently because the people in each of these locations are at a certain knowledge of food, and they have certain taste buds. So it depends again on demographics, on say, for instance, in North Bombay, lots of parts, they're migrants who have just come into the city. They've never eaten at a lot of restaurants, versus, say, people in South Bombay who've grown up with restaurants and who travel a lot internationally, and their expectations are completely different. So I think that is one of the key things that you need to understand. Obviously, I mean, you need to know your food. I mean, that that's given, and you need to be able to write. That's something that bothers me a lot with food writers and restaurant critics is that we are like, one is we need to have domain knowledge, but the other part of it is that we are communicators. We need to be able to write well. And a Zomato review or a Swiggy review or whatever it is, it's a 10-word review or it's a 200 words. There's no punctuation, there's no grammar. You can't figure out what the hell that person wants to say. They're just uh, kind of like just a lot of praise or a lot of negative, a lot of criticism. So you're not telling a story. You're not trying to make a person feel what you are, what you felt like when you ate that dish at a particular point in time. And that's one of the challenges really, that you feel a certain thing and you start. I mean, language in itself has very limited options to kind of continually describe an experience and to continually describe that experience in a fresh way. So that was really one of the big challenges for me as a critic, to when I didn't like something or I did like something, to say it in a fresh way, to make you kind of feel that, okay, I relate to this in a certain way.
Yes, I see that the entire democratization of the media that the internet and all of this that was supposed to bring in, and I see it in multiple places. I mean, okay, how many stars on so and so film, on
Yeah,
the user reviews for on a product on Amazon, or book reviews and whatnot. And there's still a place, for instance, for the literary critic, who does the nuanced view, who gives you depth, who gives you context, uh, and one should hope that with food as well, that continues the nuance thing. And I see a lot of good writing about food, but as you say, there's many people are content to look at how many stars and
yeah.
what are the the very very short reviews. And I guess that's also a factor of time, and also, I mean, the overall shitstorm that the media has been going through in the last decade or so, of its own making, of not figuring out how to use the internet and
Yeah.
get people to pay for what they say. It's a two-way kind of process there as well. People wanting.
But Peter, one of the things that I've realized is that I think with books and with art, because these are still areas that need specialized knowledge, or you don't have as much access to either books or to art, or you need to really think about it, compared to, let's say, a lot of the performing arts, or like film, for instance, music, again, where you're not really required to have a specialized knowledge. It's like, if you have certain tastes in music or you have certain tastes in food, it doesn't really matter. I mean, if you eat, you're a critic. If you listen to music, you have a sense of this thing. So it's not really required for you to have more information. And in that sense, someone else's information, knowledge, is not necessarily more valid than yours. That's one of the problems also that you face with criticism today.
Okay. So, how is it? Now, for say people wanting to become food reviewers, restaurant critics, what are the avenues available to you? I mean, yes, there is social media. You can start your own blog. So many have,
Yeah,
that food blog thing, and then, uh, translated that into doing the food book or doing the food show and things like that. Uh,
right.
but yeah, what are the avenues right now for someone wanting to, say, become kind of food critic that we were talking about? Not just this was good, this was bad, and I'm going to scream about this. Not your three-line review on
Hmm.
matter or whatever, but to be able to. I mean, as as with books, where people say that difference between reviewer and critic,
Right.
right? So to become a good food critic, what are the avenues that you have,
None.
young person right now?
None, really. Honestly speaking, absolutely none. Because most of it was happening in print publications, and
Mm-hmm.
all of those have died out. I don't think there is a really good restaurant critic remaining in India. I think maybe Mariam is the only one in Delhi who's doing it. I haven't seen anyone in Bombay. There is really zero avenue for it. It's really more geared towards marketing and soft plugs, and that is what the hospitality industry also is gearing towards, and what they would encourage actually. Because the other problem right now is that from their point of view, their investments are so high that they want to keep to be as safe as possible. So they would rather have an Instagrammer or someone do a Facebook post or even a blog, and I think even blogs are pretty much outdated now.
Yeah.
That who would plug their piece rather than someone who would evaluate it critically. So they're actually not likely to call you for this. Um, restaurant publications don't have a budget to send you out and to pay for your bill. And even if they did, the kind of money that you would make from a freelance article, that there's no way for anyone to survive on that. So honestly, if you want to do any kind of reviewing in food, you're better off positioning yourself as a marketer and doing plugs for restaurants.
All right. So what you now, when you're going to a place you don't know and you want to check out the food, how do you go about doing your research, or what do you read up on, or how do you figure out tomorrow if you get invited to, and let's take my hometown, Vizag, Vishakhapatnam. Have you ever been there?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so
Uh,
if you wanted to go to Vishakhapatnam and figure out what to eat, how would you go about it?
so normally it's like when you go to these places, you're always on invite. We're all journalists. We don't have money to kind of actually go and travel to these places and eat on our own. But let's say in Bombay, when I'm being invited to a restaurant, or then I think by now you've kind of got a sense from the length of the menu, the dishes on the menu, how things have been described. You have a chat with the chef beforehand, and you kind of ask them a couple of questions, and you figure out the location of the restaurant, and you've kind of sussed it up pretty well to know that what kind of quality of food you're going to expect, and who their target audience is really. So I mean, you kind of figure out based on, and also their price point. I mean, you look at what they're kind of what who they're selling to them from that, and you figure out, okay, in this kind of budget range, what else is available and how good or bad are they given that price point. I mean, you don't go by an absolute. So you get a biryani for like $200, you get a biryani for $600, you get a biryani for $1,500. Each one of them is different, and so you know that at $1,500, what are the best biryanis I've had, and how does it fit in with that, and
Yeah.
also the service and the decor and all.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, I guess one should somewhat. I mean, I wanted to go past this. Okay, let me just ask one more on this. Who are the writers on food that you enjoy reading right now? Media agnostic. I mean, across social media, formal mass media publications, people with their own websites, etc. Who are the names that are top of mind for you as people you enjoy reading, people you learn from?
So Vikram, definitely.
Oh,
Vikram's pieces are always, I mean, and now, I mean, he's on Instagram, so it's really fun reading his pieces and even
just
chatting with him.
yeah, for context for everyone, Vikram Doctor.
Vikram Doctor.
Yeah.
There's Mariam Reshi, of course, and she's done a fabulous book on spices, I think, which is one of the really the best book. Um, who else is there? There is Rahul Verma in Delhi, who also writes really well. I'm not sure which publication he writes for, but I thoroughly enjoy his stuff. Um, as a site, I like Goya. Goya does some really good pieces, but
Yes.
they also do some stuff which is completely. I found a lot of mistakes in some of their articles as well. But generally, this in terms of a good Indian website, this is the one that I read. Otherwise, it's really mostly books that I'm reading. It's not so much articles that I read.
Hmm?
Otherwise, I mean, Jay Rayner, I like. I think he writes for The Observer in the UK. He was really good.
All right. What have you read in the way of books recently? Within India, connect if possible. What have you liked?
In terms of food, uh, actually, I can't remember. I've been reading a lot of non-food books.
All right.
So I can't. I think Mariam's book was possibly the last one that I read on spices.
Mhm. All right.
Full book.
Yeah, I want to get my hand on Krish Ashok's book as well, Masala Lab. I
I started reading Masala Lab, but it's written in this Chennai IIT boy style, which kind of really put me off completely. So I started reading it, and then I said, maybe not, And I know he's put in a lot of effort into it, and there's a lot of science that's gone into it. It's just stylistically, it did not work for me very well.
mm, yeah, so I mean, the reason I was thinking about that as well is, I mean, as you know, I never learned how to cook. I'm very
Hmm,
biased. Most of the learning that I did on cooking has been in the last year and a half. I never had a systematic method. I could just about do a few things and improvise a few other things, but I have no fundas. And
hmm,
uh, from following Ashok on Twitter and what he was talking about, plus I remembered conversations with other people, was a sort of the the sort of an engineering way of looking at things, which I remember making a joke to a friend of mine very long ago, that this was object oriented cooking. You learn
hmm,
objects and you can then combine those objects in different ways.
hmm,
Uh, the Ashok's recipes, the simple ones that he puts up on Twitter with short videos and all that, are pretty fascinating. But yeah, so that's the thing I wanted to think. Ashok also talks about this thing about, like, authenticity. What is authenticity? And that's what we wanted to talk about today. So the entire thing of what is an authentic whatever
hmm,
makes something a something. What makes this a biryani and not a palau, to take a crude example? You
hmm, hmm.
kind of thing. So what is authentic? So I mean, where are we on the? I mean, what do you think? What's about this whole authenticity debate? What is genuinely this? And I had this authentic pizza. The pizza has been one of those things that has migrated around the world and
Yeah.
transformed, and people do their own thing with the pizza. It's a piece, it's bread. You put something on the bread and you bake it,
Hmm,
and that is the basic pizza. Uh, is even cheese necessary for an authentic pizza? I mean, is the basic margarita the the minimum pizza, or is even that not required?
hmm, hmm, hmm.
You know?
Okay. Yeah. So I think first off, this is a windmill I have been tilting at for more than 20 years now. So there are various levels to this debate, and there are various ways in which we can talk about it. But the first thing is, why do you ask whether something is authentic or not? How does it matter? You know, and if you look at just that question, it's really when food is displaced, when it's moved out of its place of origin and it's represented somewhere else, that you start asking this question. Is it actually the way that it's supposed to be done? Is it the traditional way? You ask all of these questions. It's like, say, if I had to come to your house and uh, your grandmother had to make, say, a butter chicken, okay? And maybe, say, an Anglo-Indian, no, Anglo-Indian, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So, say, an Anglo-Indian version of a butter chicken. There is no way that I would ever ask her, is this authentic? There is no way you, as a grandchild who's been eating this, say, is this authentic? You automatically assume that this is part of your culture, that this is what you've been doing all these years, and this is how it is. It's the minute that moves out of that context, that moves out of its geography, that you start asking all these questions. You know. And you
Yeah.
ask these questions because suddenly it's moved and there is a commercial angle that is added to it. You are
Uh,
paying for this,
all right.
right? So you are paying to buy something which you are told represents something. So you are actually purchasing that part of that culture. And when it isn't authentic, you're feeling cheated,
All right. Fair enough.
you know?
Uh-huh.
So that's where it starts really. And that's where all of this, that everything else kind of developed. Chinese food was one of the first things everyone kind of asked this question of, because the Chinese were very diasporic. So there is there are as many versions of Chinese as there are countries in the world, because each country has adapted the Chinese food. They've taken certain dishes, cooked it to their style, you know, and you have a different kind of a Chinese. So if in India Chinese is on the more spicy and pungent side, in Western America, I mean, in North America, really, it's very sweet.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember going to a mall in Canada and looking at a dish and thinking like, okay, I'm going to keep it for dessert because that's what it looks like. It looks like, some kind of balls in a red jelly. And then when I had it for dessert, it turned out to be a savory dish because it was actually some kind of fish balls in a sweet and sour sauce, but it looked exactly like some kind of sweet balls in a jelly sauce.
Mm-hmm.
So there are all these kind of versions of it. There is no such thing as authenticity. There is no such thing as tradition. I mean, all of these things are, and we know this from writing, from film, from dance, from clothes to housing, to architecture. That all of this is dynamic. It changes from place to place, from era to era. I mean, if you had to ask this question of authenticity, you also have to ask: is it authentic for which time period?
Mm-hmm.
Because ingredients have changed over time,
Yeah.
and the water has changed over time. The air has changed. Your palate has changed.
Yeah.
But based on your level of exposure, to different things, you will relate to flavors differently, and you will expect different kinds of flavors. And when I'm talking about ingredients, for instance, we know that we're eating far fewer fruits, vegetables, and cereals than our ancestors did maybe 50 years ago. So that basket of things that we are choosing from to cook has become much, much smaller. So what kind of authenticity are we talking of then?
Mm-hmm.
What is it? How are we representing those dishes when we change the basic fundamentals of what we're
I mean, I've been guilty of this myself as well. What I've eaten as Chinese in a certain kind of place, and then I go find another kind of place that interprets it differently, and to my mind, this is not genuine. The Bombay Chinese restaurants by the Chinese community in Bombay, and their
Yeah,
approach to food, as opposed to say, the thing that is prepared by guys who could be from anywhere around and who have a base recipe which they have done, which are, if you remember the Nariman Point carts that were
yeah, yeah.
red, roughly they were red and they had vaguely Chinese looking lettering, and that was Chinese. And
Right.
it's between those. And, I mean, the entire thing of the the what India has done to Chinese food in the US, a friend tells me, is a genre on its own. It's Indo-Chinese.
Yeah, it's Indian Chinese, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's
Yeah,
not Chinese, it's Indian Chinese. And I mean, the stories around that as well are interesting. The legend is, of course, that things like what is the Szechuan sauce and the Manchurian, the famous Manchurian, were inventions that are alleged to be from Bombay Chinese restaurants.
well, Manchurian is, Szechuan is not, but I mean, yeah, but that's Szechuan chutney, and it's actually called a chutney, really, by a lot of people. And when I was running my Chinese place, we call it a Szechuan chutney. That is definitely has nothing to do with Szechuan food at all.
Yeah.
And one of the interesting things about Indian Chinese and which causes a problem in America, is that the Indian Chinese were actually the Hakkas. Hakkas are a nomadic people. They're not based in any part of China really, and they've got their own cuisine. So Indian Chinese is used to be a kind of version of Hakka Chinese, but because Hakka Chinese didn't have enough of, let's say, computers or whatever, they started doing Cantonese. So it's Hakka Chinese doing Cantonese food in India for an Indian palate. Okay, and when this goes to America, and the Hakkas go there, they say, well, this has nothing to do with our Hakka Chinese food.
Yeah.
So there's just such a lot of change that happens along the way. And one of the things that is that, I mean, you located in all of this authenticity largely in a restaurant context. And it's always and therefore always a commercial context. We've never really asked this question in a home setting. And in that sense, also, it kind of then starts to limit what you do as an Indian or a Maharashtrian or a Goan or whatever it is. When you want to incorporate things, and you do, and families do, they kind of incorporate foods from other places into their own cuisine. You start to say that, oh, but this is not Goan food, this is not Bengali food, or this is not whatever food.
Yeah.
And really, who are you to decide? Like, I decide what is Bengali food for me or what is Goan food for me or whatever. That's my choice. And if it makes me happy, then that's fine. Like, you eat it or don't. You don't decide to judge me on it.
Yeah, the whole Anglo-Indian food thing is that the Anglo-Indian community being all over the country sort of adopted various things at various places. So my version of Anglo-Indian, thanks to my particular set of ancestors, is a very low spice kind of thing, very little chili and all that. And I grew up thinking that was it. And then the thing is, I spent a large part of my life away from the Anglo-Indian community. We never lived amongst Anglo-Indians. So when visiting later, where there were large numbers of Anglo-Indians, and I was like, this is not right for me. There's too much mirchi in it. There's too much this. And then, but it was like, this is the way my grandmother made it. This is the way, and the grandmother's in the room telling me that that's the way her grandmother made it.
Right.
I mean, we just inherited different sides of this. My family lived in a certain part of the country. They picked up a certain something from there. And the entire Chinese thing as well, the entire way that it's approached. There was this funny story I read many years ago about, the entire thing of what Chinese food in India, an Indian family touring in China, and somewhere along the Great Wall they go to a little street side place, and they served this sort of yellowish, sweetish kind of, sweet and sourish kind of sauce thing with a pastry kind of thing there, and they're like, what is this? And this is Indian, this is samosa. And I was like, okay, revenge. Revenge. And the whole thing of culture as well. I remember this years ago. I won't name which restaurant this was because this is going to be public. But I was writing copy for a Chinese restaurant by one of the Mumbai Chinese community. And so I spent a day with the chefs. We were talking about a wide variety of things. And then one of the things they told me on the side was, in early days we used to do this thing of the stock pot, where we would the stock pot was fairly common. You put all the bits and pieces of everything that you were cooking, and that was on the low boil every day. And you put a scoop of it in the rice, and it just brought the rice alive. And then someone pointed out, there are people who are vegetarian in this country. Perhaps you might want to consider this. And from there came the concept of the vegetarian stock pot, where you put all the vegetable bits in there. Yeah. So,
but Peter, going back to the Anglo-Indian thing, I remember there was this restaurant called Bo Barracks that opened in Bangalore. Okay, and this was Calcutta Anglo-Indian. Okay? And this guy took all his, he did all his research, and he was an Anglo-Indian, became particular, fixing up all his recipes, getting all the ingredients. But okay, there's a big Anglo-Indian community in Bangalore. They're going to love my stuff. I've got a captive population. You know where the story is going. So, and he opened. And there were all these Anglo-Indian aunties and uncles saying that, no, this is not Anglo-Indian food. You're doing everything wrong because Bangalore Anglo-Indian was different from Bengali and from Calcutta Anglo-Indian. They refused to accept that he was doing wrong. So they were absolutely convinced that he was doing it the wrong, and that poor guy was just at his nerves end because he had put in so much research and so much love into that place, and then to be told, no, no, this is not the way it's done.
Yeah. And again, your influences. I mean, one of the comfort foods in my house, in my grandma's house, was kaswe. It's
Yeah.
because my family lived in Burma. My grandma's family lived in Burma, and I remember when kaswe first started making its appearance in Bombay restaurants. I went to have it, because this is the food of my childhood, and finding that something it was just different. I couldn't figure it, you know, what it was, and much later, I think it was Busaba when it opened out, was the place where I finally got that taste that I had, which my grandma used to cook.
Hmm.
My aunt used to cook, because otherwise I was being served kauswe, and it was like, where are my sliced boiled eggs and where is the dried whatever? And people places were not doing that either. But yeah, so I mean, authenticity, recipes was the other thing we were going to talk about. Not sticking to the recipe, and it's a perfectly natural thing to look at when you look at authenticity as well. To adapt, to
Hmm.
not necessarily follow. What is the place of the recipe in?
What is the
What is the place of a recipe in a cook? Say for a person like me, it is necessary.
yeah
But you're a far more experienced cook and a more experimental cook. You have, I mean, I was having a chat about this. I think it appeared also in the conversation I had with Keitana last week about scales, right?
Hmm.
Practiced your scales, and if you've done your music, your basic grounding, then you learn to improvise. But in the beginning, it makes kind of sense to just do a deer and
yeah
follow exactly what a recipe is telling you. But what's your view on recipes per se, and they are being constrained, because that's the when we first talked about this, on being constrained by recipes was something you said you'd like to talk about.
yeah so for instance, I'm a very instinctive cook. I think it's just simply the way that I am. It's one of the things that I just know to do, but also that I have years of experience. I have some amount of training as well. So, I can do flavors in my head without actually having to cook things. But I do appreciate that people need recipes and people actually need proportions and all of these things. And personally, for me, recipes are really hard to write. But look at it this way. I mean, a recipe pretty much is just a roadmap to uh, where you want to kind of get to. Now, there are various ways to get to a destination. There is just not one way to get there. You can follow the direction that the recipe tells you to do. And in that sense, a recipe is a formula. And it's giving you a certain kind of chemical composition. It could be kind of handled under heat or without heat to get a certain end result. And you can follow it that way and you will come close to whatever that is. Or you can kind of, for a lot of things, you can drop ingredients, you can substitute ingredients, you can change cooking times, and you will still come to an end result, which will mostly be palatable depending on, provided, of course, that you don't get things completely wrong. And I think that is what people really should look at when they're looking at recipes and say, like, I want to cook something. It's got to be edible. The end result has to be edible. It's got to be nutritious. And really, it's got to make you happy. That really for me is what a recipe should be. Those are the three qualities that a recipe needs to have. Everything else is fast. You know, are you happy with what you've got? And even it doesn't matter like if you're going for say a fried egg and that it's over fried for it, or it's more crispy around the edge. If that is what you want, then that's great. That's fine. I mean, it doesn't work for me, and I may not want you to fry my egg, but if that's what it is, that's great. That's cool.
There was something came up in a discussion, perhaps I think on the Simple Recipes book, but on the group. But if following a recipe doesn't make you a good cook, or even improvising and being able to think is not necessarily the criteria. But someone said, and I'm not sure if I concluded this or if it came out of the discussion, but when you can save a dish that's going wrong is when you're good. I mean, you're tasting and you know instinctively what to do to save it.
Yeah.
Would you kind of go with that kind of call on what you would consider someone was good in the kitchen?
Yeah, I think for that, I mean, then it's really about being able to being able to rescue a dish that's going wrong, and to know also that a dish can be rescued or not,
Hmm.
and or whether it needs to be junked altogether. For instance, I think I posted a recipe for the firni recently.
Uh-huh.
The firni with the gulab jamuns and, uh, and rasgullas in it. I think I
Oh, yeah.
posted.
Yeah.
So I went to the store to buy powdered sugar to caramelize it, and the guy gave me powdered salt. Because salt is great. And I was liberally pouring for powdered salt on top of it and trying to caramelize it, and the damn thing is not caramelizing. So
Wow.
that's that's it. I mean, there's no way to rescue that. You just take off all the salt and eat whatever's left.
Uh,
So yeah, I mean, these kind of disasters are going to happen, and as a good cook, say, okay, you can do something about this, or you can't. I mean, like that's it. Start from scratch.
uh, Niharika, you had a question. Do you want to just turn on audio and ask the question? And Sumita and Wilfred, please, uh, turn on audio and if you want to join in as well. Niharika, would you want to ask your question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Perfectly.
No, I think it's something that Antoine, I think, discussed it. I do agree with him when he says that um, authenticity is not really that important, and who decides what's more authentic? It really depends upon where you come from, what cultural upbringing that you've been brought into. But I mean, I think that example that you gave in about Bo Barracks, and I know restaurant, particularly in Bangalore, understand that. When you come across those kind of situations, what you really, I mean, what are the, I would say, the constituents about what will work? I mean, is it more the taste palette of that particular culture, or is it about sticking to authenticity? I mean, for example, Indian Chinese.
Hmm.
I mean, the fact that it is not obviously not authentic at all.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
if the Chinese cuisine were to stick to what the Chinese cuisine is, which is much more blander than what Indian cuisine is,
Hmm.
would it have had that kind of an adoption that it has today? So is it more about sticking to a certain cultural context, or is it about sticking to authenticity? I mean, how do you decide what you want to do?
I think first of all, one of the things we don't understand about restaurants is that they are businesses.
Yeah.
They are there to make money. Okay. Uh, their job is not really to represent a culture or to be an ambassador for that culture. They're using that culture to make money, and that is their ultimate goal, really. So they are going to do whatever it takes to bring the rupee in. And if it means adapting to the local palate, then they will do that. And that is what is going to happen. And I mean, we see this a lot with not simply with Chinese food, we see this with Indian food as well. Indian food that travels from one state to the other. I mean, in Bombay, you have the whole phenomenon of the sweet sambar, which is something you won't see anywhere else, and which drives South Indians' blood pressure up the roof. But this is exactly that what works. And then in other places, like you have uh, Jain Punjabi food, or like Jain Chinese. There's a really lovely movie called The Big Night, I don't know if you've seen it, but it's a movie that I almost always refer to when I'm talking about authenticity. And it's about two restaurants, two Italian restaurants in America. I think the movie set somewhere around the 30s. And in one restaurant, they're doing absolutely traditional Italian food. And in the other is another Italian guy, and he's doing completely Americanized Italian. And obviously, the one that is doing American Italian with its like spaghetti and meatballs is doing roaring business, while this one, which is doing very very good food, but refuses to kind of compromise for its clientele, sees absolutely nobody in it. So I think that completely answers this whole question of what are you going to stick to when you are a restaurant. If when you ask this question out of that, when you ask it in a home, and that's where the whole question kind of really falls apart when you start kind of asking people at home, are you doing authentic, whatever it is or not?
And also specifically on that Chinese context, Niharika, the thing,
Yeah.
China is a huge country with, as you know, with the kind of diversity in its cuisine. There is no monolithic Chinese cuisine in the same way that there is no monolithic Indian cuisine, right?
Yeah.
There's so much regional variation. Okay, I mean China perhaps is does want to become a cultural monolith and have everyone think and feel the same way and assimilate into the Chinese Borg, perhaps. But there is actually a lot of variety there. So you know the different, I mean, the broad classifications even would have further sub classifications as well. So depends on which part of China and what are you trying to represent. I mean, I guess the only way you can sort of demand a certain kind of authenticity is if you were invited to a dinner at the Chinese embassy or consulate or whatever, and they were telling you that this was the cuisine of so and so region, in which case you
Hmm.
expect something from there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
No, I mean it's huge. I mean, I mean, Peter, just look at it this way: if you had to go to an Indian embassy in Washington or Melbourne, and they did serve you a meal, what would they put onto that meal? Would you say that it's really Indian if it was just Punjabi food? And this is one of the things that I get really irritated with in America and Canada. It's largely just a very restaurant version of Indian food, and it's not really my food. It's not your food. It's not Assamese food. It's not Andhra food. It's not Bhopali food. So it's just this again.
Punjabi
It's a
food.
very Punjab. Yeah, it's just this very what the international community or the American community thinks about Indian food is what they'll probably be serving.
In a sort of a Bollywoodization of food, right?
Exactly.
Certain kind of thing which goes across in, like, in the same way that things like the Sangeet and all that have gone into South Indian weddings, uh,
Yeah.
which were not necessarily a part of the the traditional culture there. It seems to happen with food as well. But yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yes. Yeah, and also I mean the authenticity part of it. The other thing that we didn't touch on to a large extent was what is the spirit of that? I mean, if say you were in that Indian embassy in Melbourne or Canberra or Washington or whatever it is, what ingredients are you using? Are you getting your ingredients coming in from India? Are you using local? In which
Yeah.
case, what part of it? I mean, you can make a perfectly decent pizza, in my desi opinion, with the ingredients you get out here
Yeah.
that you go and buy from the streets and which are grown local, which are grown within a you know 20-kilometer radius of Bombay, right? And you still get a Indian wheat, the flour is from here and all of that. So is that an authentic pizza? And I think it's an authentic pizza, right?
I mean, I could be very pedantic about it and say that no. I mean, for a pizza, you need double O flour strength. With a certain gluten content. And that's the only dough. That's the only flour that you can use for pizza in India, and you don't get that dough, and you don't get that flour in India. So technically speaking, no, it's not a pizza dough. But does that pizza that you make and that you slaved over. Does it work for you? If it works for you, yeah, it's fine.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing. I mean, like, um, if you go to say Italy and they're making like a pulao with Oreo rice, and they're not using long grain basmati because they can't get long grain basmati in whatever village they are or whatever it is. Who are you going to sit and tell them like, no, this is not the right way to make a biryani or a right way to make a pulao? It works for you good enough. Okay, I mean, I understand that this is the context in which you're working and you're doing the best you can.
But that's an interesting thing, Join. But when you review restaurants, then is it more about the authenticity of the cuisine, or is it more about the ingredients? Is it more about whether I like the food or not, depending on my own taste palette? So as a food critic.
So there are two things. One is that do I know what the dish is supposed to be like and what it's trying to represent and how close or how way off it is from that. And secondly, like I said, I mean, restaurants are very uh, geography contextual. So I need to understand whether the people around it, the people who are actually eating that food, would they actually be able to appreciate the food if it had to be made in the traditional way? Would that restaurant actually survive and would these dishes sell? If they wouldn't sell and this makes no sense, then I say like fine. I mean, is it tasty or is it not tasty? Have they used good ingredients? Have they used good technique to make it or not? That becomes a lot more important than for me to say that okay, yeah, this is authentic and they need to get kind of brownie points for it. So what a restaurant does in different parts of the city or different parts of the country, doing the same dish will kind of really vary differently, and my response to it will vary depending on where that restaurant is. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so I was more saying it in the context of the fact that that could still be a restaurant that's doing well.
Sorry, you broke off. I didn't get your last bit.
The last bit of your sentence just got very muffled me.
Okay, so what I was saying is that still could be a very successful restaurant. It's like the Sagars of Bangalore. I don't know if you're familiar with Bangalore, but when it comes to critiquing of food, is it more about how? I mean, obviously not how that restaurant is, but a quality of food, and therefore, coming to the whole context of the discussion around authenticity, how do you determine what that quality is? Is it based on my own understanding of that particular cuisine as a food critique, or is it more about have they used the right ingredients or not? And all that.
So again, here it
assuming
kind of
it's a successful restaurant, but still not authentic enough.
Yeah. So here, I mean, there are a couple of ways for me to play it out, and it depends on how familiar or unfamiliar I am with the cuisine. So with certain cuisines, I am very familiar. I mean, broadly with a lot of Asian and a lot of Western. But if it's a kind of specific regional cuisine, either from India or from another country or a particular style of cooking, and I don't know about it, then I'm going to really judge on how well was it presented? How did I respond to it? Did I like it or not? Then it becomes more of a very subjective evaluation because then I have no history of that dish. I have no context to actually put it in. So then I have to kind of put it in the context of aesthetics and pleasure. How did it make me feel? And there are dishes that may be technically completely correct and may be done in exactly the way that they should be done, but which leave me completely cold or which I don't like at all.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I mean, for instance, Andhra food. Andhra food is way too spicy for me to handle. So if it is actually done in the traditional, authentic way, so to speak, I really would not be able to eat it. And that's happened to me with, say, Mopla Kerala food. Uh, a place to I went in Kochi Island. Really great seafood, fantastic stuff, budget, really lovely food, kind of a street place. But the food was so incredibly pungent that I literally had 1 teaspoon of it, and that's it. I could not eat any more of that stuff. And the neighbor, it was a really successful place. I mean, they were just doing orders hands over fist, but I couldn't have it.
I mean, this thing of this, the sheer physical, I mean, I have like zero tolerance to chilies, to spiciness,
Hmm.
little bit, and I'll start sweating a little bit.
Yeah,
Really
No Andhra food.
Yeah, I mean, it's ironic because that's where I was born, kind of thing, but this is what my family ate, right? And the thing was, it's just this that you put too much in it and I start sweating, I lose all enjoyment of the food. For politeness, I can manage to eat it. Okay, I wouldn't be able to eat full on Andhra, for sure. But I have eaten a lot of spicy food merely because someone has made it for you. And to me, that there is no greater compliment in that thing when you're visiting, when you're going to someone, when them giving you something that they have made for you, right? It's huge. So I will never refuse anything that has been made for me, and I've eaten with great discomfort. Yeah, but in a restaurant, for instance, I'm paying for it there. I'm entitled to ask for what I want, and so even if it's I will ask them to please give it to me without the chili, and if they can't, then I don't want that particular dish. And I mean, just a note on this on the side, it's not particularly relevant to the debate. It's, I still get, people will tell me that it's not the real thing without that chili. And I'm eating a rather tasty dish, in my opinion.
right.
It tastes very nice to me. Without that, if I were to eat that chili, it would smother the rest of the taste for me. Because that's your body's reaction to a chili, right? You don't taste a chili, you feel a chili, you feel it like pain, right? And it anesthetizes your tongue,
Yeah,
which is why people who like very spicy food also like very sweet food and very highly flavored food because their thresholds are a bit higher. Because
yeah,
unaccustomed to perhaps it's only because I'm unaccustomed that I get flavor out of that thing without the chili. People are like, how could you eat this stuff? It just all the same. It's bland. It's like hospital food. I was in hospital at several points and enjoyed the food, because it was nice because they were giving me what people would dismissively call hospital food, and I was like, nice.
yeah. But the flip side of it, Peter, is that I don't like bland food either. I don't like, so when people make a big fuss about French food or British food, I can't handle that either. And I remember I went to London once, and a friend of mine actually had been waiting for me to come because she wanted to eat jellied eel, and like she refused to do it, but she knew that I was stupid enough to kind of do something, that she could con me into this. And really, it was eel that had just been cooked in fish stock sauce, I mean, not fish, in fish stock, till it kind of really congealed and became a jelly, and flavored with just a little bit of vinegar and white pepper. That's it,
Yeah.
And that was horrid. That was absolutely horrid. And that is one of the most popular street foods in the UK, in London. So, you know,
What's your view on condiments? You've read Pratchett,
Terry Pratchett?
yeah?
Not really, not very much.
Yeah. Because the head of the School of Wizards is what Tarek Pratchett refers to as an auto condimenter.
Okay.
On the table is then put onto the food. I tend to sort of dislike adding stuff to food. I will eat it in the form that it is in, unless someone tells me that these are the things you're supposed to, like taswe. These are the accompaniments. I mean, you put your stuff in, and these are the sprinklings that go along with it. But I will not reach for the ketchup when I'm having kaswe, for instance, which I have actually seen people do, or to reach for the chili flakes or whatever it is. But I guess this is a way of for people to sort of say spice up. I mean, if you had the option of chili flakes at the side of your jelly deal, would you have picked it up?
Yeah, quite probably. I would have done something to kind of made it more interesting for me, something that actually suited my palate or kind of my taste buds. And condiments again is something that people go really crazy about. I mean, in America, there is a sense of what are the things that you can put on a hot dog, and
Yes.
ketchup is like, oh my god, like that's it. I mean, that's the last. You should never ever put ketchup on a hot dog. But uh, I grew up and I've always been an experimenter. So I would make fried rice sandwiches with ketchup. That was one of the things that I did, and I think it works fabulously. It's uh, some things like kind of work start off as being just bland, and then you really layer them up with flavors that you like, and that you kind of paint a picture of food in your mouth that works for you. So condiments are fine with me. I love them, and I have like about 7 different types of mustard in my fridge.
Yep. Yeah, same here. I love mustard. I mean, this you know, this is one of the debates that I often have with a lot of people when they're talking about recipes, and I'll say things like, people will tell me like poha is great. And I'm like, poha actually is awful, unless it depends on what you're cooking it with, right? It's like
Yeah,
white rice is great. White rice to me is, to my taste, is not great. It's something that you eat with other things. Poha,
yeah,
I mean, poha is like basa for vegetarians, right? It takes on the whatever else, the other flavors around, and you're tasting all the other flavors. But yeah, because for me, with a lot like your jelly deal, for instance, I mean, there are a lot of things that I like to eat where I like to do very, very little flavoring in it because I want to taste the ingredients. So I'm eating prawns. I don't want
mm,
to smother it with a very strong sauce. I want to taste the prawn. I want
yeah,
to taste the carrot. I don't want, pav bhaji is okay in itself because it's a mixture of tastes and my palate can't distinguish what has gone into a pav bhaji. But to me, that it's very anti-food. That what I'm tasting is a sort of a glop with I can't figure out what the ingredients are. I can't taste anything separately. And I guess there's views on different things
So
and where they
one of
combine.
the things that we forget, Peter, when it comes to cooking and when it comes to recipes, is that if you look at really the history and you go back, and I think maybe when you talk to Purush about this, it'll probably come up. But cooking really was a pharmacological act. You used food as a treatment, and it's really amusing that Americans and the West are now suddenly discovering the idea that food is medicine. But that is where food actually came from. That of the external world, the world outside of the body, food is the only thing that goes into your body. What you see, what you hear, what you feel are only things that your senses convey to your brain. Food actually goes into your body, and therefore food acts as medicine. So a lot of recipes, are based on combinations of food that are good for you, that are healthy for you, that provide certain balance of things. It's just that now that we are in let's say, a pharmaceutical age and an age where we are not reliant on food to kind of either control our weather, our temperature, rather, to kind of control our environment, or to control our health, that we can talk about it purely in aesthetic terms. And we can kind of sort of separate those two things. But otherwise, the whole history of recipes has been the history of treating you for various things. It's been a lot less about pleasure, and we see that far more in India than we see that in the West. Even in the West, I mean, a lot of dishes, if you go into and look at them more closely, they're all based on the theory of humors, which really is underlines everything. Really, it's a theory of humors that underlines much of all traditional cooking.
Sure. Yeah, yeah.
So today, when you're saying, "Oh, you want to do this spice and I want to change this around," you can do it because now it's just about taste. It's not about eating to be healthy.
Okay, yeah. I never thought of it like that. Yeah. I mean, we sort of add weights adds weight to eating local because you're eating for the environment you're in,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
Yeah. But again, I mean, eating local fits in well because you can't also just eat only local because the locale, your geography doesn't provide you with everything.
mhm.
So you have connections with other places as well, but you eat for your environment. And one of the problems with a lot of diets is that you have migrant populations who come into a geography but carry their old food habits,
Yeah,
which are not suited for that geography.
yeah, and I mean not necessarily just geography, but also uh, the evolution of the area that you're in. For instance, the thick, Malaya lassi
Yeah,
is the energy booster for that farmer who's working in 45-degree heat at one point and freezing cold at another part of the year and busting his butt out in the fields. And you're saying that, me sitting in my air conditioned office in Gurgaon, which is not very far away from where my grandfather was slogging in the fields, and
right.
I will have that heavy Malai wala lassi and not, and, I'm never going to get cardiac disease of any kind. But
Exactly.
how you're working it
Exactly.
out, yeah.
Yeah.
The ancestry, your peasant ancestry, all of us are from, hunter gatherers or peasants of various kinds, right? And
Yeah.
we're city dwellers now, and if we were to eat the same thing as 10 generations ago and not live those lives, then we could be doing ourselves a disservice.
You are, I mean, you ultimately are, because, the other thing about the body is that the body is actually geared to hoard calories.
Yeah.
So I mean, the body is not actually geared towards weight loss, which is the big challenge, really. So yeah, you add on the calories, and the body loves it. It just wants to suck up as many calories from the environment as it can, because that is the body's history. That is what it remembers of time. That basically it's developed in a time when there weren't enough. So the more calories it got it, the more it's going to accept, and then you have a problem.
Then you have the heart attack, the heart disease capital of the world, and the diabetes capital of the world,
Exactly.
which is, yeah, again, the authenticity part of that is like, okay, so what is authentic? And the authenticity has to be then interpreted through the lens of where you are. So if you're eating very high calorie, high fat food and living a sedentary lifestyle, you are, you know,
So
sort
I'm asking for trouble at the end of the day.
of.
So I mean, in that sense, I mean, authenticity is actually working against you.
Mhm.
It's better for you to adapt and to change,
Hmm.
and fit in with your context, rather than just kind of sticking to what your history has been when it makes no sense.
It's a bit hard to. I mean, the thing is that because the sort of the city life or the sedentary life, or rather the sedentary city life, because in cities there are many people who do the same kind of hard labor that they would have been doing in a rural background. But the sedentary city life, the office life, the kind of life of a large variety of the people who would perhaps watch this in the future, is a very recent, comparatively. I mean, in overall time frame, it's a blip in the radar of
Yeah.
human evolution. So it's also a bit difficult to try and figure out what is appropriate in that sense. You don't have generations of wisdom to rely on because generations have not lived the sedentary city life.
Yeah, I mean, you don't actually. Uh, the best that you can go with is adapt with what the local diets have been, in a sense, and you can kind of look at how people from that region are actually eating, because you will see that on the Konkan belt, it is not as calorie intensive as it is with other places in North India, or it's not as spicy as it is in Andhra and Telangana, where the heat kind of goes up and you need a natural system of ventilation, of air cooling. So, I mean, this is you do have some kind of pointers to understand what works and what doesn't, and what kind of needs to be taken out of your diet and what needs to be incorporated in it. But yeah, not specifically anything that tells you that this works for a sedentary lifestyle and or not.
Right, right. Just checking. Niharika, just turn on voice and ask the question, yeah? Niharika's put a question, statement in chat rather. She says, I can't have the Punjabi dhaba paranthas at my home because I'll put on 500 calories.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sumita and Wilfred, who are also here, do you want to turn on audio? Video optional, of course, but do you want to just ask questions or join in? Not necessarily a question, just chip in.
Yeah, sorry, I had to just move away from some sound. So, yeah, really no question. I'm just enjoying the discussion in the chat. So, but I mean, just a sort of a remark and a experience that I went through when we talk about this whole authenticity problem. Can you hear me now better?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. The whole I remember being in a village in Goa and going to somebody's house and having a sort hotel over there, in somebody's house, and then I visited someone else within that village, and the next day, and I happened to mention that I was at so place yesterday, and I had thought I really liked their sort hotel, and the matriarch of the house where I mentioned this said, "Oh, that is not sorpatel. That is," and I mean, she doesn't know how to make sorpatel. You should have my sorpatel and realize what is actually sorpatel. And this was like, it's like 400 meters away from each other. So I mean, that was and I finally ultimately in the next couple of days I did taste her sorpatel, and it was pretty much different from what I tasted in the first house. So I mean, we're not even talking of going from one country to the other, and seeing cuisine change in terms of authenticity and flavors and all that. I'm talking about 400 meters, so from one house to the other. So I mean, that's where the whole issue of authenticity and food being so subjective and depending on our palate. I mean, that's where it lies. And I mean, I've remember talking to my mom and talking to some aunts also, and trying to get a recipe from them. And it was, a pinch of this, a handful of that. And I mean, those were the type of recipes that one encounters when one talks to people of that generation. So my observation is that, I mean, so when you're dealing with a pinch of this and a handful of that, then authenticity tends to go out of the window. You cannot. So recipes, from my belief is that recipes and measurement and all came down when you brought commercialization into food, and you had to sell the food. Here it was, you were entertaining people at home, so you did it your way. But when you needed to sell it and you needed repeat customers and you needed people coming back for that same taste, then it went into grams and spoons and 1.5 teaspoons of this and that. So that's when the recipes came down to measurements and stuff like that. And that's what I mean. Restaurants. I mean, the reason you go back to a restaurant is because you want to taste, that same dish made the same way. And you I know that I love eating at small restaurants, and very often I know for a fact that the guy in the kitchen has changed because the dish has changed. I mean, he's gone on leave or he's left and he's joined another restaurant. I know for a fact that when I ask the owner, they will say yes, it has changed. But nahi, recipe to same hai. I mean, they try to sell it off as that, but it isn't. I mean, it has changed because the guy has changed, and his whoever's in that kitchen, their estimations have changed. So I mean, that's where I see. I mean, struggle with the whole issue of people saying, is this authentic? Is this not authentic? I mean,
Yeah.
when recipes are changing within 400 meters within a village, then it's how do you put down and say no, this is authentic and that is not authentic. Becomes a big
Yeah.
conflict.
One of the things that I keep thinking about recipes and about measurements, for instance, and that's a really good point that you brought up, is that for the previous generation, it literally was a very visual description. They would actually show you their hand and say, take this much, take that. It wasn't about measurements. But also, when did the gram as a unit of measurement kind of evolve? So, I
Correct.
mean, if you're talking about authenticity, you're talking about a history, you're talking about something that goes back centuries. But measuring tools in themselves are very, very modern. And the way that people measured, they didn't measure for individual dishes, they measured for groups of 6 or 10. And so the tools for measurement changed completely. So that's one part about recipes. But the other part about the cook changing and about the food being different. One of the things with authenticity and one of the things that we think about it is the idea of consistency, and that something is replicable in the same exact way every time. And that, if you ask me, is a very industrial idea. It is not something that is agrarian. It is not something that you will get from anything that is handmade. It is something that you get when you're talking about mass producing. Because if you actually look at agriculture and if you actually go into the farm, nature is not consistent. Nature doesn't give you fruits or cereals or whatever it is that are exactly the same weight, exactly the same thickness ever. I've been to a farm, a pear farm in Italy, in the northern Italy, and where the lady actually showed me one fruit, one side completely red, one side completely green, and just completely natural. And nothing, she had not done anything to it. It was just how nature has created that. So when we go to restaurants and say that, oh, the food has to be consistent, it has to be exactly like that. It cannot be exactly like that unless we change the way the ingredients kind of come together and then come to the table.
And how does it work for mass-produced stuff? Your, convenience foods, or things that you can buy cooked in that extent, like say biscuits. All right.
Yeah. So, that's one of the things why we are seeing the rise of monocultures is because we're saying that let's look at certain grains or certain fruits or certain vegetables, not because they're good for you to eat, but because they're the best to either farm industrially or they will give the most consistent result in mass manufactured products. But you still need to do a lot of tweaking. You still need to add in chemicals, kind of balance out things. You're constantly checking pH levels and nutrition levels. And that's why you need additives for all of these things to get a uniform product out into your pack.
Because even if you are doing monocultures, the water, the terroir, all of that, I mean, does make a difference, right? You can grow
It
your
does.
Cavendish banana in Kerala and you grow your Cavendish banana in, I don't know, Himachal Pradesh. And it's going to be different because of what's in the soil, right?
Exactly.
Cavendish is pretty much a monoculture all over the world right now.
Yeah.
There will be differences. So yeah, that's interesting. So yes, the additives part. Yeah. Sumita, did you want to say anything?
Actually, I was just thinking this whole thing about authenticity. And so, a chef was once telling me that, like in the European cultures, like say French and stuff, I mean, it's so different from ours. Like this chef was Telugu, and he was saying like, I mean, every like home will have its own sambar, right? So, I mean, no two homes will have the, so therefore it can't be like a recipe, like a strict recipe. And that is like really different from what would happen in say French cuisine.
I think that really is a big myth. And I think one thing that the French did, particularly the French more than anyone else, is that they did codify their cuisines much better than any other culture has. And for instance, white sauce is 30, 200, and every kind of hospitality student knows that. But again, I think that is a bit of a myth. They have codified it. It doesn't mean that you have to follow it in exactly with the same way. It's just that something that is taught to hospitality students in India, that this is how it's done. And this is how chefs in India have started to understand Western food, and particularly European food, that they have this idea that it's absolutely codified and they follow the same kind of recipe everywhere, which is not true at all. I mean, if you do 30, 45, 300, you'll still get a pretty decent white sauce.
Right.
It doesn't mean that it won't work. It may be a little thicker, say perhaps, and that will work in some other things. But it's not true completely that all of French cuisine has been codified, and particularly regional cuisine has been codified to the extent that Indian chefs think they can.
Interesting.
That's the other thing. I mean, we were talking about prepared stuff. I mean, a few generations ago, everybody would have their own sambar masala at home, or the masala mixes. You would have your courtyard where you dried your chilies and you did your hand grinding and all that. Now you just go and buy a packet of MTR masala. And I mean, this is another whole conversation to have about the whole processed stuff.
Yeah.
And me being someone who was not very curious about the food that I got as a child. For instance, if you'd asked me as a child what went into a dosa, I wouldn't have been able to tell you. Okay, a dosa existed in itself. Things like making sambars and all of these things. My mother made some of her own stuff herself, put in her sumit mixer kind of thing. But even that doesn't happen now, right? A lot of people, and we're getting a little more separated from our ingredients, right? There's some foods that are the ultimate processed stuff, right? I mean, they bear no resemblance to the things that they were born from or that they're a combination of, and they exist on their own. But I put this question on the group at some point or the other, asking about this, which is a lot of this generation, you have the generation of women around my age and maybe the generation before us, who were also working, and because we are a patriarchal society in large, will also have to cook. And when they're juggling those things and they don't have the courtyards and they don't have the time to grind their own masalas, they will buy the convenience masalas. But they did learn this from their foremothers. The next generation actually know how to make their own sambar masala? Is another complete set of questions to have. What is,
Yes.
as you said, every house has their own mix, but many very staunch things of, this is authentic Tamil Nadu food or Karnataka food or whatever it is, will go MTR masala and use it fairly happily.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I fully agree with you. And that's why even this group and the kind of discussion that's happening on it, I find it really interesting because it's true, right? I mean, for all of us, like say I'm 50. So, I mean, there's been such a generation lost from my mother to me. And I mean, obviously, so, over generations. And so all of this will be lost then at some point, right? If we don't do something about it.
Yeah, but do you see it only as loss? Do you not see the things new being added to your cuisine as well? I mean,
definitely. Of course, yes. Absolutely. I mean, a lot of it is added, yes. I mean, but I suppose that we kind of take for granted that, because we've traveled so much and we are exposed to so much more, and therefore then, the meal is, I mean, to my mind, of course, far more exciting than it would have been at my grandmother's time. So yes. I mean, that I fully agree with. However, I mean, I'm just, just this whole thing that so much is being lost, and before we know it will be all forgotten, that kind of thing. So,
I personally don't have a problem with things being forgotten, and for me, this is a very right-wing perspective really on loss, on that we have to hold on to everything. It's as if nothing new has been added. that we aren't learning new things, that we aren't working with new ingredients, that we're not working with new techniques. We are constantly updating our culture, and how many things we've already lost.
Yes.
It's not that we're suddenly impoverished, that our cultures, that we have no connection with our cultures have nothing to offer us. We still have very, very vibrant cuisines. And Peter, I just wanted to talk about one thing that you brought up, and I don't think you realize it, but technology, and how that affects recipes and cooking and the whole notion of authenticity. We use gas today primarily to cook. The heat levels of gas are very different from what you do when you heat with wood. The way that food aerates, you're using either stainless steel or aluminum compared to earthenware. You're grinding in a mixing which actually aerates the powdered mix and heats it up very, very differently from a stone grinder. So all of these changes are also happening. The water that you're using, it's slightly chlorinated. It's coming from different sources. So technology is also affecting recipes, is affecting how you're cooking. It's changing the way that you're cooking. So you are going to lose things over time. I mean, you can
Yes.
either say that, man, the gaslighters have gone, and we're in a terrible state, or we can say that we've got electricity and there's so much more to do. I mean, that's really one way of, that's my question. Which one do you want to be?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I think a topic for another day, and just came up with the conversation is, the whole concept of authenticity is also different by caste. So the influence of caste in food. So if I were to give my example, Andhra. I'm an Andhraite, but I can't stand spice, and it's probably because of my cultural upbringing, because I come from a Brahminical household, and a Brahminical house versus a non-Brahminical house is very different. The same sambar is like polarly different, and Chettinad food versus non-Chettinad food. So I don't know, maybe a topic for another day, Peter.
No, completely.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I think it's very interesting,
Yeah.
right?
So there's this author called Sidney Mintz, Mintz, who's an American anthropologist, and who's written a lot and has written some really great books on food. And when he talks about authenticity and he talks about tradition, and he says the true foods of a place are the foods of a region. And when I think about that, for me, that statement is incomplete, because it's a very Eurocentric statement where a region usually comprises people of the same religion. And the minute you take that out into India, where a region not only has people of different religions, but also people of different castes, and then you add on also gender in India, that also makes a difference. Then you've got to kind of ask, whose tradition and whose food are you actually saying is authentic or inauthentic? I mean, in this context, we don't even know what Dalits eat.
Yeah.
I mean, there is just no record of their food. So and there is no representation of their food either. So, I mean, it's like they are completely excluded from this conversation.
Yeah. And it's a bit of a two-way thing on trying to get that conversation going. There's a conversation that someone PGP was having with someone outside, which is about what how would you want to know about this. This is, I'm not a professional in this field, right? Food is not my topic of research. I'm telling you about my personal experience, and why should I come and do your do your Google search for you, so to speak, when why should I be doing the emotional labor of telling you about my childhood and what uh, in some cases, I guess, when you're looking at caste atrocity and discrimination and all that, is a revisiting trauma of what you were denied, of what you couldn't eat, or what you were, or ingredients you were not allowed to be. We were talking a conversation with friends not too long ago about something that would be regarded as quintessentially from the non say Tamil person point of view, the curd rice. And someone said something about it, yeah, it's a very Tambram kind of thing. And I was like, yeah, okay, there's one level of thing that says Tambram and puts that in a slot. But then you look at what is the non-Brahmin thing of the simple thing of access to curd. You were not getting the curd, you were getting buttermilk, right? So it's actually not even a completely Tam experience. It is very literally a Tambram experience from one. I mean, I don't know enough about this to know whether my friend was talking about this accurately or not. But the whole thing of what you can eat and what you can't eat, what ingredients you can access, what methods you can have, gender, as you said, what a woman is allowed to eat. The woman is eating after the men in so many cultures. If a woman is widowed and what she's allowed to eat then, because there again another set of stuff. Who's cooking cuisine is it? What is authentic? It's so wild and huge. But yeah, we're like close to 2 hours, and I promise this wouldn't go over an hour and a half. But this is fascinating.
Yeah,
No, sorry.
I've come to think about it. I'm just thinking, right? So they also use of onions in sambar. And sorry, I'm going back to the sambar conversation. It's not necessarily a very, I would say, a Brahminical thing, because it would be like, some vegetarian groups don't have onions, right? So
yeah, what is sattvic and what is not, and yeah.
Exactly. So it's so interesting, and the amount of spice that you use, the amount of sambar masala you use,
and so much of what we consider as quintessentially Indian, the chili is not Indian, right?
It's not Indian.
Absolutely.
Potatoes.
South American, right? Chili is?
Sorry?
Chili is South American, isn't it?
Yeah, Mexican.
Origins in Central America.
Nice.
Yeah.
The potato is Peruvian.
Yeah, the potato is not from India either. I mean,
it's Peruvian. So
other root vegetables that ancient Indians ate, but the potato as we know it now is not Indian.
Yeah.
Tomatoes.
Tomatoes,
Yeah, so you're...
The other thing also I'm thinking a lot about is that, as families change, I mean, the structure of the family changes, the meal will change, right? I mean, let's say, the traditional Indian thali in most of our households. I mean, you possibly, if you're a two-person household, you cannot make 10 things, right? For a meal.
Yeah.
So then,
And I mean, see, the things, if you're in a large joint family, and
exactly,
women of the household were doing the cooking, and making a thali of multiple dishes is a lot easier with division of labor, I would suggest. Not having been in that kind of kitchen and not having been responsible for that kind of cooking, this is just guesswork on my part. But I guess it would be a different proposition there than, for a couple on their own, or with a kid or two. It's still, to expect the layout is a bit, especially since one person who's doing the cooking, who's usually a woman, is very likely also has a day job. But
exactly. And I mean, everyone, even those time constraints, and also this whole thing of I'm always thinking that, okay, how can I minimize wastage and all of that? So, you cook in such a way that, you don't really have too many leftovers and all of that. So
that's another topic altogether.
But one of the things about tradition in India and, about tradition cuisine in India and protecting traditional cuisine is that basically you are protecting a tradition that exploits women. And do you really want to do that? I mean, is that really so important to you that you want to continue with that? Because all of traditional cuisine is completely dependent and kind of arose from the fact that there would be women in the kitchen to cook. When you take them out of the kitchen, and then you say, like, how do you locate feminism in a context like this as well?
Right.
But just to come back to your Dalit thing, one of the things that we only think about Dalit food in the way of what they had and what they were not allowed to eat, and we don't ever think about there being a pleasure involved in that, or that Dalits liked what they ate, even, I mean, though it was restricted. And for me, since there are no Dalit cookbooks, there's just, I think, 1 or 2 cookbooks really, and I don't think any in English. I've been reading Dalit literature to kind of understand, to glean whatever is written. on food and find out, whatever it is. And there are so many passages where they talk about looking forward to eating certain parts of the animal, enjoying things. And for me, that came as an absolute shock because I'm so used to thinking about Dalit food in a way where, oh God, these guys couldn't eat stuff and that's it. That is the only way that I could think of Dalit food. And I never ever thought that, yeah, these guys could also find pleasure in that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But yeah, it is indeed. Yeah, yeah, you made it very clear right now. We're looking at it through a lens of privilege and trying to compensate for that privilege by seeing the deprivation.
Yeah.
And only looking at it through the lens of, oh, those poor people who couldn't eat X, Y, and Z, and not acknowledging that whatever that it's not necessarily an entirely negative experience for them. That they're not looking at this only in that way. That there is enjoyment in, I'm struggling to find the words for this, but yeah, you've just opened out something in my head in the way that I'm looking at this, which is struggling for the words.
Quality of ingredients.
Probably I'm putting this very clumsily and I'm putting it in a way, I'm trying not to sound horrible about this, but I didn't think of this before. And thank you for that.
Yeah, no, I was reading Dayapa's, I think Baluta is his book, and he talks about the eagerness with which, when an animal comes for them to be slaughtered, and how they kind of fight for certain pieces because they know certain pieces taste better than the others. And for me, I would never, ever have thought about it in that kind of a way. For me, it's, oh my God, like, those poor guys, they've got to kind of eat a dead animal. And I mean, that as you put it, that's a privilege talking. That's all that we can kind of relate to.
Mm-hmm.
This whole thing also about who is for whom. So in the Bundelkhand region, there's a group of women, like a feminist group called Vanangana, and they work with Dalit women, and so like a collective of Dalit women. So they started a catering service. So their thing was, that when we look at livelihood and all of that, it shouldn't be the regular staff. And we need to challenge this, that who cooks for whom. So they've been, like running for about 20 years now. And a friend of mine, was one of the people who started it. So it's just so fascinating to see that, a group of women come together to challenge this and are able to do it. So, they run a little community kitchen and there are people who come and eat. So it's really fascinating to see that.
Yeah. No, I mean, in that sense, cooking can be terribly empowering as well. And it's a lovely way to kind of use people's skill and kind of give them an opportunity to kind of earn for themselves as well.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, as we change as a society, as we what comes to us, what we can buy ready, and cooking can if it becomes more as a potential way of earning a living rather than the thing that you must do because of who you are.
Yeah.
Woman, you are a certain thing rather than and that's when it's choice, when it's empowering.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
So does that mean authenticity becomes much more important if you want to project a certain kind of an ideology, and that is more important than commercials?
America's like, stay on topic, guys.
You look at it. Let me just move it out a little bit away from food and say, like, supposing you had to ask this authenticity question to in other areas. Now, a couple of years ago, none of us would have dared to ask, is there such a thing as an authentic Indian? Now look where that question takes us and what kind of problems it kind of brings up for us. And then is it really worth to say that, or is it even possible to say that we can bring it down to X, Y, Z determining factors of authenticity?
Yeah, you just take that into a whole lot of things. I mean, how you dress and, it gets in.
Yeah, I mean, with food, it becomes very easy. It becomes safe, and it becomes a way to kind of, you can control that representation. But when you start asking it in other ways, and again, just to go back to say, the authentic Indian woman, should she be wearing jeans? Should she be wearing a skirt? Should she be going out? Isn't she being terribly inauthentic? Do we have a problem with that? It works. It's fine. Why do you have to insist on authenticity in food?
Yeah.
And you see that morphing, I mean, in the area of clothes, for instance, the average Indian man, even like 40, 50 years ago, had adopted Western dress to some extent. Customized a bit. Your shirt was left out. The bush shirt, so to speak, became standard wear. Shirt and trousers were okay for men all across the country. Women, by and large, mostly stayed within regional. Now you've seen that evolve into what South Indians call the Punjabi or the Salwar Kameez or whatever it is, having become more standardized across India. And you're seeing less of the traditional sari weaves and the sari wearing styles.
Absolutely.
If you go to a wedding, for instance, where people are dressing traditionally, you will see the saris then, but you will also see a lot of men in suits or galaban, which is just one type of formal.
I was just thinking about exactly this the other day, that, like say even 20 years back when you travel, so if you went to a Chennai or you went to a Calcutta, then the people you were hanging out with, I mean, we were so fascinated by looking at each other's clothes and jewelry, and now we are all wearing Fab India, so it's the same thing,
Yeah.
In that sense, I mean, the we here is also a different kind of we, and not exact. I mean, it's by far from being representative. Of as hard as it is to be representative of India per se. We are urban English-speaking, computer-using liberals and Fab India wearing kind of thing, right? So all of that. That's it. Like I said, I mean, the whole fascination for me of doing this set of conversations of table talk was exactly for this kind of conversation. It's food and food adjacent, because food is the center of so many things and you can take it in so many directions. And
absolutely.
And it
has become authenticity. What is authenticity?
Yes, Niharika, we are so sorry, Niharika. We went away.
Exactly. How could you do that, Peter?
Yes, and I am.
But it's an authentic conversation.
Thanks for making me very unpopular already.
But you were doing
very
good moderator kind of job on that. You were just gently steering.
I'm not supposed to. So I know I'm getting. We're at like. I get the message.
We're at like 11 o'clock now, and 2 hours into it, and I did say an hour and a half, like I said. So I think this is a good place to say thank you and wind this up. For sure. And so thank you, Niharika and Sumita, for joining in the conversation as well. Wilfred's not here.
Lovely to have you guys.
Thanks very much.
Kind of thing that I do want to continue doing. I do want to monopolize the conversation for some part of it, but I do want to have it more as friends chatting around a table, and so sort of a hybrid conversation, which is partly interview and talk show or whatever the heck you want to call it.
A potluck of sorts.
In a way, potluck. It's table talk. It's chatting around the table. It's the kind of conversation we'd have if I had you over for dinner.
It's not an authentic kind of. It's a more.
That
now.
This is too funny.
That will make Niharika very happy. Yes.
Really nice.
But thanks so much, guys. And this was really fun. So thank you, Antoine. And thank you.
Thanks a lot, Antoine. Bye.
Thanks. Lovely meeting you guys.
I'll see you soon.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.